with this being the 100th anniversary of airmail service, I figured I would do something airmail themed. So here we have the Douglas Y1B-7, and this starts around 1929 or 30 when Douglas designed the XO-35 and 36. And the main difference between those were that the XO-35 had uh, geared engines and the XO-36 had direct drive to the props, and eventually the geared ones would win out on the next group of aircraft built. But the Air Corps saw it to be leaps above the old Keystones that were still struggling along at that time. But that's where this started to get a little bit confusing for me, was that the XO-36 was then redesignated XB-7, and after that one's first flight in 1931, the Air Corps decided to order a few to test. That's when they became known as the Y1B-7, and there were 7 of those built, and 5 built for observation as they were originally intended as Y1035s. Uh, and these new airframes also saw a little bit of improvement on the skin used. The originals were corrugated on the fuselage, and that's pretty typical of the time, I guess, with the tri-motors having it and Junkers aircraft using it to good effect. But all these were smooth, and they got 675 horsepower Curtiss Conquerors instead of the 600 horse in the original prototype. All of these were geared, gave a little bit better fuel economy from what I can understand, at least on how things are done now. But all the bombers went to the 11th and 31st Bombardment Squadrons at March and Brooks Field, respectively. Brooks Field being not too terribly far from where I'm at in Texas. And all the Y1035s went to the 88th Observation Squadron, also at Brooks, I believe. You can fact check me on that one. But soon after all this, it was shown to wax the Boeing P-12, which was our fastest fighter at the time, and it just could not keep up. So that pointed out that we needed a little bit faster fighters. I mean, coming into uh, coming into the 30s, we had the P-12s and the P-26 P shooters, and they were great aircraft, but apparently not as fast as this, which that would come into play a little bit later. So I said all that to say this: the 35 and 7 became quite useful in about 1933 when the airmail scandal happened, and the basic story behind that is the Airmail Act of 1930 basically allowed the Postmaster General at the time, Walter Brown, to extend or consolidate airmail contracts as he saw fit, presumably within the need of public interest. Well, it did not quite happen that way, and these contracts were discussed and awarded in a meeting between Brown and the executives of all the larger airlines in what became known as the Spoils Conference, and this effectively kept any smaller carriers from even being able to bid on any route. and they were just split up and divided amongst the existing airlines. And a Senate investigation ensued. And in February of 1934, FDR said, "Hey, no, stop." And he shut down all airmail contracts until a new contract system which could be drawn up. Enter the Air Corps. They were tasked with picking up the slack the cancellation would cause. The remaining Y1B-7s and 35s were put to work among a few other types, including the Keystone bombers they were intended to replace. The pilots were to be the best trained available. And considering the fact that most experienced pilots were assigned to training schools and they did not want to pull them from those schools, they would be. So most had less than 2 years of flying experience and little to no nighttime flying or flying in adverse weather, and that would prove to be rather fatal in a few incidents, because this winter at this point was a rather persistent one, and before Air Corps ops even began with the mail, 3 pilots had been killed due to a bad weather incident. 10 more would be lost in the coming weeks, and even Eddie Reckenbacker and Charles Lindbergh were voicing their opinions on the matter, and they were not too happy with it. Well, I will probably get into that in another video since I'm kind of pressed for time. And I also made the mistake of recording this in full time instead of time lapse, which kind of works because there's a lot of information in this anyhow. But my phone filled up of memory, so not all the inking got shown. So I do apologize for that. I'll try and fix that in the next one. But so picking up, Eddie Rickenbacker had basically called the whole program legalized murder, which I wouldn't go so far as to say that. Maybe a little negligence or not knowing what it all entailed, because the Air Corps never flew mail. They didn't have the logistics to support it, but I think they did a pretty good job of it, considering just the speed at which this whole program was initialized. But by mid-May, all but one route had been transferred back to an airline in much the same way as the previous, what led to the scandal in the first place. But, with the Airmail Act of 1934, competitive bidding resumed. It was a little bit more fair. So what happened to the airlines? Well, pretty much nothing. They were not allowed any new routes. Of course, that just needs some creative paperwork. Northwest Airways became Northwest Airlines, so they could bid on new contracts. United Aircraft and Transportation Corporation split into 3, and one of which became Boeing. Boeing had been around before that, but not in that exact name. But that is a story for another video. And in all, these 2 aircraft flew over 1,400 hours flying mail. 4 were lost to accidents, and the remaining examples flew in training roles until they were retired in 1938. So, with all that being said, I think this airframe deserves its place in history, and deserves to be known about. Plus, it looks really cool, and it kind of fits the cartoon styling well. Because, of course, it's a lot longer, but I don't know. It just looks correct. Now, I did make a few mistakes here, as far as things being not correct to the airframe itself. Tail wheel was not retractable. I did not know this going into it. I just assumed since the mains retracted that the tail wheel retracted too, but that wasn't exactly common, so that's my error. Uh, there's a couple other here and there, like the turret ring on the nose should have been a lot bigger. I thought it was a sight glass, but I kind of threw this video together, and it's taken a long time for me to voice all this. But I think the next one will be a lot better. We can hope, and of course that's my goal. Make the next one better than the last. But I'll go ahead and throw on some music for the remainder of this, and you'll see the time lapse of the color. I had to slow this down to fit in all that information, and got leftover slow speed action, so I do apologize for that as well. But rivets, lots of rivets. And if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe. Contact departure. Good day.